I'm going to call the meeting to order. Will we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I have roll call, please?
Ann Pierce.
Pam McLeod. Karen Karitonov.
Carol Rock.
Tim Broderick.
Matt Jazokis.
Heidi Duford.
All righty, agenda review. Did anyone have any modifications for the agenda?
No.
No?
I don't have
All
any.
set?
I move we accept the agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All righty, the minutes from August 8th, 2022. Any amendments to those?
I have actually a request for quite a lengthy amendment, so I probably will ask that these be tabled till that's made. On page 4, the discussion of JBAB, the transgender policy is really not represented well in the minutes as far as the discussion during the meeting. So I'd like that rewritten because it only represents one member's view in the minutes.
Sure, we did express several views that evening, so. How do you want to do that? I mean, do you want to do that now or give Deb the minutes and she can repost them?
Why don't you
Just-
submit it to me?
Just table it.
So we'll table the,
You could submit a written revision that you want to see in there.
so we
Okay,
can
I mean, I
take,
think going back to the if someone went back to the recording and actually summarized the full discussion, it'd be helpful. I mean, I can write something up, but,
Okay. All right. Let me, I'll contact you about that.
so so we have a motion to table the minutes of August 8th, 2022? So
I'll
moved.
second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All righty. We're on to public input. So public input is for people to express opinion the first round on any agenda items. Do we have agendas out there for people to see?
They're in blue.
They're in blue over there. So the first round of public input is related to the agenda. So, and typically we give 3 minutes per person to speak. And then if everyone has an opportunity to speak, then we offer the next round if you want. By law, we have to give you 30 minutes for public input. That's a new law in New Hampshire's books. So hopefully we'll be able to all speak and share our opinions. So who would like to go first?
Yeah, does this include the transgender policy? I'm sorry.
It's
Okay,
under
so-
action items.
Please.
So it is on the agenda. Sure, sure. And you need to state your name when you get to the podium and that you live in Alton.
Thank you. Good evening, school board members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Sean Wood. I live in Alton. I have 2 children who go to Prospect. So I'm here tonight this evening to advocate for keeping the transgender policy as is. I tried to look online. I wasn't sure exactly what was happening with the policy, so it's just very basic. My reason for this advocation is because, like most of us, I believe that our children, no matter where they come from, what they look like, what they believe, what their gender is, or what gender they identify as, they should all experience school as a place where they feel safe and included in a learning environment. That's something I think that we can all agree on. I think that's important because when we create this environment for all our children, we are encouraging them to succeed and become productive members of society. And when this is accomplished, I think we all benefit, every one of us. I think where we don't benefit is when we actively discriminate against or purposely leave out a particular group of children. I think a school transgender policy in general is entirely necessary since we as a society are still learning about this issue. I read through the Alton transgender policy, and I believe it's well written. It takes appropriate measures to provide that safe and inclusive environment for transgender students, as well as the entire student body. I think that removal of the policy could open the door to making transgender students feel unwelcome and may have adverse effects on their academic future and also as their future as productive and active members of our society. Additionally, lastly, the transgender community is currently experiencing a relatively high rate of suicidal ideations as well as successful attempts, unfortunately. So I think having the transgender policy in place allows us to take those positive steps towards preventing any unnecessary suffering. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would someone else like to speak?
Hi there, I'm Andrea Crusoe of 6 Meadowborough. I'm a super proud mom of kiddo from the queer community who is an ACS graduate K-8. It's been a long time since I've stood before you and asked for your consideration. I'm out of practice, which is actually a very good thing. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the members of the board who voted in favor of policy JBAB back in February of 2020. Peter Levitt, Karen Caratona, Karen Cloud. I'd also like to acknowledge Julie Brown for speaking publicly in support of this policy before she was officially elected to the board the following month. I realize that policy amendments happen frequently, and it isn't necessarily something to be alarmed about when a policy comes up for review. But given the 2 items listed for consideration tonight and the current political climate, I feel I must give public voice for my support of policy JBAB. As I mentioned earlier, my child is no longer here, but I speak tonight for the hundreds of kids that will spend time at Alton Central who may not even know they need a voice or an ally yet. Policies are not just empty words. These words become actions, and actions become habits, and habits build community. By ensuring that the rights of our gender non-conforming students are protected by our words, we create a community in which they feel safe and protected, and thus are able to learn in a nurturing environment. And that's good for our entire school community and beyond. Therefore, I ask you to continue to support policy JBAB as written, so that kiddos like mine know that Alton is a place where they belong. Thanks in advance for your support.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak?
How we all doing? Jason English, lives on Prospect Mountain Road. When I first grew the courage to come up here and talk to you folks, we were talking about mandatory masks and COVID. Thankfully, that's not on every single subject. My kid was thrilled to go to lunch and be able to see his kids and eat and act normal. It was a positive thing. But to this date, since there are still people that are afraid of COVID and think that our actions for what we did to our children and their mental health, there is still 3 years of data here and only 1 childhood death. Why is that important? Because last meeting I was following along and you're talking about doing just the minimum 2-hour training for suicide prevention. And there has been a lot of studies. The CDC still has not released these numbers of actual suicide numbers, but the attempts are looking like 35% increase since 2019. I think what we did to our kids justified just a little bit more than the minimum on this one. And the other thing that I found interesting was when you guys you gotta do the disclaimer, right? I don't care what your sexual preference is. I don't care who's in your bedroom, who's not in your bedroom. I don't care about any of that stuff, all right? We're all Americans. We all have different views. That's great. But when we're talking about keeping things from our children, and that it's a right that when a child talks to a teacher, and that's not up to a parent to know about this conversation, like you guys have some sort of immunity where a lawyer or a doctor would have, it's not the same thing. You know, we're talking about, with all due respect, you know, kids potentially being talked into taking hormone blockers, which is a definite adverse effect on the human body. There's no way around it. Whether that's somebody's choice to do it to themselves, that's fine, okay? We shouldn't be promoting it, and if a child comes up to somebody, a teacher, and starts these conversations, and the teacher just is immune from this, from having to talk to the parents, I think it's a pretty big decision. It's a lifetime decision. And that absolutely warrants a parent's discussion. And as far as, you know, a guidance counselor, we get into a little bit of a gray area there. It's a safe person. Hopefully there's no bias there. But I would like to point out that even a parent chooses which mental health professional their child goes to. Okay? So I just, you know, when we start playing around with child's rights, where my kids' rights and a whole lot of other people's kids' rights were violated, all right? They weren't allowed to come to school and get an education unless they wore a mask. And then we're going to talk about kids' rights on potentially harming their bodies because the new fad or the new whatever is going on. They're confused. The parents should be in every single step of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak tonight? No other public input? Going, gone. All right, we'll close public input. On to informational items, enrollments. Any questions about the enrollment numbers? No? Okay. Financials. Heidi, did you have anything you'd like to say to us tonight?
Things are going well.
Good.
August. I do have an audit update. The on-site for Alton has been completed except for one item. We have spent over the threshold for federal funds, so we are looking to do a single audit. So they'll be back one day to do the single audit,
Okay,
which costs. But you had signed the engagement letter for that.
right.
Other than that, things went really well.
Okay, great. Any questions for Heidi?
Just anything we need to know or have pointed out in the financials?
now.
Still early, so.
Yeah, it's still
Okay.
early.
All right. We're on to budget calendar. So it looks like we're in red here. And we have a budget work session on the 12th for Alton. Is that correct?
Yeah, and for you, for the board to decide which day you want to do that, you'll recall that can be a long afternoon.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's typically the basement of the library
Right.
workshop.
We can do it at Prospect this year. I
Okay.
would prefer. I think that would be better.
That's
I'm
okay with
fine
all
with
of you.
doing it at Prospect. Anyone have any objection to having a meeting at Prospect? That's
Just
fine
that I
with me.
think that administrators tend to get interrupted when we're doing work sessions like that at school. That would be my only thought about doing it in school.
But there's a room available that nobody has to know.
And it would only be the ACS administrators.
Right, it wouldn't be.
So if we were
Oh, we're
at
doing
high
the Alton
school,
budget at,
we
yeah,
have
okay. yeah.
Right, so
Alright.
John,
Administrators from-
yeah, that's a good point.
So what time are we talking about?
Are we supposed to choose between these two dates? Is that what you want us to do?
Last year we did have 2 days.
We
And
did.
used one, did we use them both?
I think we used both.
Used them both?
We used them both, did we? I must be blocking that memory.
One was very,
Mm,
the second day was super short, or was shorter,
Yeah.
is that correct?
And there's also a board meeting scheduled that week. So I think that's what you did with one of the meetings. You combined the board
Yeah,
meeting
we did, yeah.
with the budget.
Yeah.
But having it at Prospect will make it a little bit more difficult to do that because of the time. If you do it 4 to 6.
Well, isn't that the week that Monday's a holiday, so we wouldn't
Monday
have
is
a
a
board
holiday.
meeting that Monday anyway.
Right, Monday is a holiday that week. We're not meeting on the holiday. So,
I'm all for however we can do it, combining the board meeting with the budget work session.
You could post your business meeting after the work session so that if you wanted to have a regular agenda with public input and all those sorts of things, people would know that that starts at 5:30, for example.
That makes sense.
You would have already been there by then
Right.
for a couple of hours doing the budget.
Yeah, that makes
Sounds
sense.
good. So do we want the business meeting the second day that we're there? That easier?
That probably makes sense since,
Sure. So we'll meet on Wednesday, the 12th at 4 o'clock at Prospect Mountain, and you're going to find us a room there, Heidi?
Yep.
Okay. 4 to 6 gives us an end time the first day. And then the second day, if we have a business meeting, it may not end at 6, just so we're aware. I mean, we'll have our budget part, but then if we have a business meeting, we may have more public input, we may have more agenda items, so, just so you know. Okay?
Madam Chair.
So you plan
So
on that.
the risk with this plan is that if you have a very short second day of budget
Right,
work,
then
you'll be
Right.
hanging around waiting for the posted business meeting. I might suggest that you consider posting the business meeting the first evening.
Sure.
It'll make for a longer day overall, but then the next day, when you're done with the budget, you're done.
right,
All right.
makes sense.
Is that okay with
sounds
you
good.
guys?
Yep, I
All
agree
right,
with that.
good suggestion, thank you.
And when would we expect to have a copy of the budget to review?
I will try to get it to you that Friday
Okay.
before.
Great, that'd be great.
Something to read over the holiday weekend. It's so much fun. The budget.
So that's budget.
All right, so we've decided October 12th, we're going to meet at 4 o'clock and then have our business meeting at the end at, what, 5:30?
Mhm.
All right, and then we'll have another meeting the next night, 4 o'clock. Okay. All righty, superintendent's report.
Short one, and not in a memo form tonight. Ms. Flock, you might want to talk about the CIP meeting that we attended. I think those of you who are at the joint board meeting have already heard a little bit about it. It was my perception that because we represent a new central office, that last year there was some apprehension on the Alton CIP committee about our capital planning, and we had an excellent meeting. I don't think there is any apprehension on the CIP committee about our capital planning. We were able to share a long-term plan that we've developed over the last year. The previous plan hadn't been updated in a couple of years anyway, probably due to COVID. So we've done that. We were able to give them exactly what they're looking for. The CIP committee is really just trying to predict what the annual warrant articles are likely to look like over the next 5 years, and then if there are any big items likely to come up in the 5 years after that. We explained some of the differences between the school budget development process and the town's budget development process, and came to an informal agreement with the CIP committee that we'll visit with them every August, even though you're not doing your budget until these 2 days in October that we just talked about. And then whatever advice or opinions they express, we'll bring the chair like we did this year, and we can bring that message back to all of you. That happened this year. The one capital warrant article that I would anticipate recommending to you in October, they asked if we could change the number a little bit, which seemed reasonable, so we'll tell you that whole story when we do the budget. But it was a very productive meeting.
And I want to thank Tim because he created this very extensive report for the Capital Improvement Committee and brought it with him. And so really it was so extensive, they actually stopped talking about it and said, well, we have so much in front of us here. And Sean did a great job also talking about different improvements in the school. So they were both very impressive with their presentation. I was just along there for the ride. That's about it. But
Thanks for going, Carol.
the committee was very receptive, and we just needed definition of their role, and we got that. We heard very clearly, they just want to make sure the taxpayers aren't overburdened by looking at all the warrants that are coming up on the town as well as the school. So we were able to talk about that and kind of reduce one of our warrants based on that discussion. So it was very productive.
The other item on my report is I've received a request from an ACS teacher, Rhonda Campbell. She is in a doctoral program, and for her research has proposed and has passed IRB review at her university. She's proposed studying the effects of an after-school program, both on the students who participate and the faculty who teach or who run after-school programs, and her proposal is to do research here at ACS with our teachers and students. So doing research with students is very tricky, and it requires extensive protections, both for anonymity and to ensure that parental consent is secured prior to anybody participating. So I've reviewed her IRB application, and like I said, she passed IRB, which means the folks at her university who do this for a living have already reviewed her questionnaires and her application. She has an excellent description for parents. It would go to the parents of students who participate in after-school programs, giving them information about her research, and she would do a survey and some interviews, and giving parents an understanding of what she's asking about before they decide whether or not to consent for their children to participate. There's nothing that I see in this proposal to prevent me from okaying it, but when research is proposed to be done in a public school, it really, I might be able to argue that I could sign it, but I feel more comfortable checking with you. So I am comfortable signing permission for this to be done here, simply because I'm satisfied that with her documentation, that parents will have all the information they need, and nobody will be coerced or forced or tricked or in any way will end up participating inappropriately.
Right, it sounds like it could provide some good information.
Good.
Yeah. I'm assuming we'll get the report and maybe even a presentation on it?
She'll write a whole dissertation.
Great.
How many hours
As
do you
long as we
have
get
right now?
we get a summary, that'd be great.
Summary would be good, right.
The abstract.
So you don't need our action on this, you just
I
want
don't
it.
think I do, but it's one of those things, and you've heard me say this before, where if I did it without talking to you and you didn't like it afterwards, that wouldn't feel right.
Okay. Any more questions for Tim?
Nope.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
That's good.
All right, principal's report, I guess you get to do that, Jim.
Yeah. I'm Jim LaFreniere. I'm standing in for John MacArthur, who was out today with his principal's report, which he wrote some things down here, and I wrote some things too. Want to start off with the open house. Was again a success. We had a lot of people come. Mr. Perrin grilling hot dogs out back, teachers visiting their classrooms with the kids. This year we had a scavenger hunt that seemed to go off pretty well. A lot of kids were participating in that and running hither and thither around the building. We also had the bus come. I guess Lisa, the bus driver, arranged this so that we could have kids take a bus ride, especially the little ones who had never been on a bus before. She ended up doing 4 rides. She had taken them down to the circle so that she did some sharper turns, so kids who aren't used to having no seat belts got to experience that in a little practice run. So she was very excited about it. She really pushed hard for that, and that went very well. First day back to school went very well. Our first week went well. We even had a fire drill and never had one as quick as we had. I still have the paper here. It was like 4 minutes where everybody was out of the building accounted for. Because Mr. MacArthur likes to take accurate times on these. So that went really well. Electives will started this week, so we got fishing, and we have tennis, and we have Explore Your Passions, Walk Fit, Eastern Philosophy, Building with Nature, video productions. So that took off this week. They started with those. I saw the kids coming off the bus with their fishing poles today, so they're pretty excited about that. That has been pretty much a big favorite. At the end of this month, there'll be NEWA testing for grades 3 through 8. And that's all I have.
How did the start of school go with technology?
How did the what?
How did the start of school go with technology?
Oh, well, there
Is that
have
a
been
loaded question?
some printing issues and things of that nature, so all
It's got to
things
be
that.
a frustrating issue for teachers trying to prepare their classrooms.
Yeah, but I think that, you should always have Plan B, so,
All right.
that happens when you put all your eggs in one basket and you depend on technology for everything. It could be tough, without a doubt, so it's a
Yeah,
good idea to
that's
have a
tough.
backup.
That's good.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Building and grounds report. You have in front of you Sean's report. Does anyone need any clarification on that? We did pass all our inspections, I guess. correct?
Yep.
Which is good. Doesn't surprise me with Sean in charge.
Does a great job.
He's doing a great job. Have it, new shed was delivered, September 20th. Two-way radio upgrade was done. Automation project to the 3-4 wing is complete. HVAC paving project is done. Seems like everything's been done.
It will be delivered, right?
Oh, yeah, September 20th hasn't happened yet. I'm sorry.
Check that, Carol.
I'm retired, you know, I don't pay
I know,
attention to
dates
dates. Here we go. All right. Any questions about the building and grounds report?
No.
So what is the SAFE grant applications?
So we, there's a $13 million program being jointly administered by Homeland Security and Emergency Management and the Department of Education that has made up to $100,000 in grant funding available to each school in New Hampshire. Now, if you count the number of schools in New Hampshire and multiply by 100,000, it's more than 13 million. So it's not clear how this is all going to work out. Most of that money is going to be awarded sometime in the next few weeks. They've been a little bit vague, but we put in 2 applications. We put in an application in the vestibule over here. There's an airphone outside and people get buzzed in, and then they're locked into that climate-controlled, relatively climate-controlled vestibule, and then have to be buzzed in again in order to have access to the whole school. And they can look through a window at the main office, but have no way to interact with the main office. So if a parent needs to drop something off, pick something up, talk to somebody in the office, they have to be given access to the school, right? And if they turn right instead of turning left to go to the office, they're wherever they are. And I know this isn't the kind of thing that we think is likely to happen, but this is security. This is how you try to keep a building secure. So we put in a grant application under this program to put a sliding drawer, like at the bank drive-through, between the vestibule and the main office, with an airphone system so people can talk back and forth there. And if somebody's just here to drop something off or pick something up, they don't have to come inside. They can just come in there. So that's one. And then the other one is to replace the electronic access control, the badge access, on our doors. So those 2 grants are in under that program, and we'll let you know what
Okay.
happens.
Right. Was Matt supposed to be on the agenda?
That is on the agenda.
Presentation was at the beginning.
Where is he?
The presentation.
He's the presentation. Oh, he's way up at the beginning.
Oh, I missed it? Oh, I'm sorry, Matt.
That's okay.
You should have yelled at me. I skipped over you.
That's all right.
I apologize. So Matt, would you like to do your student achievement data report? Oh my gosh,
Now
why
that
don't you
I'm out
guys
of order,
knock me
maybe.
over the head over here?
Do we want to do that now or after action items?
I think it makes sense to do it now, people in the audience might be interested.
Sure. Sorry, Matt.
That's okay, no worries. In front of you, I have the New Hampshire SAS scores in math and reading over the last 5 years, actually 4 years because of the 1 year with COVID, and tried to outline what our math scores were, proficient levels compared to the state in both math and reading. So some things to keep in mind, obviously, prior to COVID, there was a focus on our ELA curriculum. And if you look quickly, there has been some quick growth results, certainly not what we would want, but certainly heading in that right direction. So we'll continue to take a look at that ELA focus. The other part of it is that we're going to take a look at our spring NEWA scores. And then obviously, as Jim pointed out earlier, that we'll be doing NEWA at the end of this month. So we'll take a look at the growth from spring to fall and see what that kind of takes a look at. And again, looking at multiple data points as we look at our progression so that not one piece of data is dictating what's going on. We're also going to take a look at our interventions and our intervention strategies to see what's working and what's not working and make some adjustments to that as well. I'll be working with John and Shay on those pieces. And I think the other part of it is really kind of taking a look at especially with the SAS, the online modules that teachers have access to, and really taking a look at the types of questions that are being asked the way in which they're being asked, and really kind of not teaching to the test, obviously, because that's not what we're looking for, but certainly start to incorporate those types of questions in their day-to-day routines, if not in their assessment practices. And again, a quick glance at this, you can quickly see that if you look from 4th to 5th grade in math, there seems to be a significant drop in most years. So certainly we want to take a look at what's going on between grades 4 and grade 5 as a result of that.
Matt, I have a question.
Yes.
And it's just more of a general question, and I apologize, 'cause I'm not familiar with the SAS. I'm in the high school world. Is it similar to the NEWA in that it's a digital-based one-day test or two-day test or something like that?
It's over several days, yeah.
Yeah.
It's, you know, if you look at the math, the ELA, it's a several-day process, and then obviously, I don't have science on here. The next time around, we'll take a look at science.
No, I guess my comment is that, I know that the scores have dropped, but I'm always happy to hear you say multiple data points, because I always feel like so many of these digital tests don't truly paint the whole picture of how capable some of our kids are, because for different reasons, they rush through a test, or I think it's really difficult to monitor and evaluate everyone's output.
Mhm.
So
I think there was an issue with the computer screens. I think they had to
It's so
change
small.
screens
Yeah.
in order
Yeah.
to find an answer. They'd have to go back to another screen. Then that's the feedback I got from a 10-year-old. But
Yeah.
he found it very, very frustrating. And he did very well on his scores, but he said it was so hard, Grammy. I had to go back and forth, back and forth.
Right, and I can see where some kids would get very frustrated. So although I recognize that there was a drop, and I understand it, and with COVID, but I just want to, kind of point out that it's a tough thing to just go by, too.
Well, I think at the other meetings that I've had, I've also expressed the fact that when we start to look at data points, again, we're not going to shy away from assessments, whether it be state assessments or our local ones. But we also want to take a look at our core values and beliefs and kind of understand what data points we can pull from that as well to see, we talked about a person who's going to be looking at after-school participation. What does that look like here at Alton Central? Is that a higher percentage? Is that a lower percentage? And what are some of those other things that we want from our kids? And really look at that as well to paint the true picture of
Right.
an ACS student.
Right.
Right, and I had some questions too, I know you're just giving us one piece here, and I know you just started also. But just to make sure I understand clearly what this report says, so the percentages we see here are percent proficient?
Proficient, yes,
Okay.
compared to the state.
And how is that a comparison?
So if you look at grade 8, right, and the
Yes.
math, our math proficiency was 20%, where the
Yeah.
state was at 33%.
Okay. I guess, my question is, where do we go with these numbers, and actually, and where are we comparing them to, for example, the NEWA tests?
Well,
And other testing,
yeah.
just to kind of get an actual trend line we could compare. So it's not necessarily just something to do with how the test was taken or the circumstances of the test. And also, we've got some concerning numbers in math here
Yes.
across the board. So what are our next steps in our plan to address that? I
Right.
know kind of last school year, we were focused back on literature. The year before that, we brought in professional development and had an emphasis on math. I think, I got that backwards.
Well, that's before my time,
Yeah.
but you purchased, so you had spent a lot of time on the ELA curriculum, I understand, for a
Right.
few years. And then right before I started, the board purchased a new math program. So
Right.
implementation of the new math program just started last year.
Okay.
Right, so
Now,
you have the
to what degree did
Eureka's
that
K
kind
through
of,
5.
you know,
I think
Yeah.
prior to that ELA focus, we had a couple years of math focus. I believe we did. So, I guess what we'd want to see in one of the next board meetings is what's the path forward, and based on these numbers, what are the steps we're taking?
Right. And part of that is looking at the NEWA and how does NEWA compare to this to see if there's discrepancies along
Right.
the way in that process. I also looking at, working with Shay and kind of getting a really good understanding of what's been worked on. We have a handful of new teachers, so what professional development do we need to bring in for the new teachers in terms of our ELA program as well as our math programs? So they're up to speed. I'm sure there was some training that took place when we purchased those other two processes, so I want to make sure that they have the training necessarily as well. And what's the fidelity of those programs, and making sure that we are hitting those marks. And I think the other part of the big piece is the interventions, right? What are we using, and are those interventions giving us the information that we need to help set up those RTI groups for those kids to be more successful?
Have the teachers been given any time to analyze the data?
We have not as of yet, so.
Okay, because that's an important piece, obviously, where they're going to have to look at the trends in their own classroom and say,
Yeah, I don't know what the history is here, but I observed and shared with you last year that when we saw test data, it was just last year's. There was no longitudinal analysis of data. So this, we can, and Matt and I will, read this in a lot of different directions. I mean, it might be a little too easy to just say, oh, well, COVID happened and therefore. I mean, we control this environment, and we control the time that we spend engaged with students. So I wouldn't want to assume that we can't do anything. This is within our control. And Matt already mentioned this, but it's particularly interesting to note some of the drops between 17-18 and 18-19 before COVID. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot to dig into here. And it might be longer than before your very next meeting. We do need to triangulate with sources of data from other tests or other sources. They don't all have to be standardized tests, but just starting with this, there's a lot to unpack. And I don't also want to make it sound like I don't think there's been any effect of lost learning due to COVID. It really looks like there has. You can just look across the top line, 8th grade math scores, nearly 50% proficient in each of their 2 cohort years prior to COVID.
Right, but so did the rest of the state.
Afterwards.
So did the rest of the state.
And so did the rest of the state.
And we're performing under the rest of the state. So I don't think we can put it in a box and say we're going to blame it on COVID, because there's a comparison here also.
That's what I'm trying to say. I agree with that. I think that we need to look at this in terms of what is our program and where do we spend our time, curriculum dollars, and professional development, as opposed to, well, we know it's not going to be as good as it used to be. We get paid every week. We need to find our way through this data and figure out what to do to improve achievement.
And on the back side of that page, you'll see, when I looked at the bottom piece where what would be our current 9th grade. So looking at their scores from 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th as a sort of cohort trend. I think it's important to be able to match up versus cohorts versus trying to say, last year's 5th grade did this to this year's 5th grade. Mm-hmm. So those would be our current freshmen.
So is the RTI being done during wind time? Is that what's happening?
So that I can't answer specifically, because I haven't been in a meeting with Shay tomorrow to really kind of get a full feel of what's going on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think that happens during wind time, what you're talking about in terms of the interventions. That's
Yes.
what it's been in the past.
So it's both reading and math during that time?
Pardon me?
Is it both reading and math?
Yes, whatever they need.
So do they cross grade levels? Do they cross classrooms? Do they share kids? Or is it just in their own classroom they do?
Oh, no, they share kids.
They
So
share
They did that last year. I don't think they've set that up so far this year, but
Okay.
I know they did that last year.
All right, I was just curious. All right.
So I guess my other concern is the last time we looked at testing numbers, we had a similar picture that we have a deficit in math. And it was kind of more specific to certain grades, I think, in some of the other data we looked at once before. But we're still, so I think we're ready for a plan on what are we going to do about those scores.
And what I'm
and any
hoping to do.
comparison that can provide some context to
Right.
it.
And what my goal will be is to drill down on each of these grade levels to see where there are deficiencies, to see if there's a common thread each year. So if it's, equations, let's use that for example, and we're struggling in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, then we know that that's a constant thing that we have to focus in on. If it's problem solving, number sense, things of that nature, and really kind of look at what those trends are versus making some assumptions.
It's reasonable.
And on the flip side, I like the cohort view. I think it's all about student growth, right? Not comparing one grade level to another, but looking at the students, and how they move through the grades and how they are doing. When you look at that view of this year's ninth graders, you said for our reading scores, I mean, that's really impressive growth when you look over 5 years and how that particular grade level has done. So I think that's great and a definite reflection of the focus on that particular area.
Got to celebrate those positives.
Those high school ELA teachers are like, yes.
Any other questions for Matt?
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Sorry about skipping.
That's
you, sir.
okay.
You'll forgive me, I'm sure. All right.
Release some of the hype.
We have some action items here. So we have food service loss transfer.
Yes, the food service this year has a loss of $40,115. So I'm asking if you guys can vote to transfer it from the general fund to cover those costs.
I move the transfer of $40,115 to cover from the general fund to the food service fund.
Yes.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. you have
And
that.
just, these free lunches aren't really, is that part of the cause, is the federal free lunches and?
The cause of the food loss?
Yeah.
The food
Is there
expenses
any-
were pretty high.
Just the expenses of the food, okay. All right.
We're a relatively labor-intensive food service operation in this school
Okay,
also.
all right.
Any other questions? All right, so policy JBAB, transgender and gender nonconforming students, is a continuing discussion this night. We are not going to make a decision tonight. Rebecca couldn't attend tonight's meeting, and she asked that we wait until she's back so she can express more of what she wanted to talk about. So I have no problems with that, but I told her we'd have to wait probably till November because October is so budget focused. So the November meeting is when we'll take action on this policy. And the November meeting will be the second Monday of the month for those people who want to attend. Tim did provide information for us from various sources to just.
You want me to? Yeah, and understanding that there could be some public interest, there are additional copies of this packet up here. What I attempted to do, and I wasn't here for all of this, so I checked some records, and I tried to provide a synopsis first of what has happened in the New Hampshire legislature over about the last 7 years with regards to transgender and gender nonconforming citizen and student rights. There have been a couple of important pieces of legislation that have passed the legislature that have been signed by the governor. So I described what they are and tried to encapsulate what they do, what the effects of each of those are, at least as with regards to schools. There are other parts to some of that legislation that I didn't bother getting into. I gave you sections of the RSA that apply. I'm actually on my second page already. I gave you sections of RSA 193 that address discrimination in public schools, both 193, Section 38 and Section 39, and then in RSA 354A, the applicable section there too. In the winter, right before 2020, in December of 2019, the School Boards Association recommended a policy. They had previously, the School Boards Association had a very short kind of vague, but it existed policy regarding transgender and gender nonconforming students. They'd had it since about 2015. Some school districts had adopted it, others had not. It wasn't required. With this new legislation, as of December of 19, it did not specifically require that a policy like this be adopted, except that every district, and I provided this quote to you at the bottom of page 2, must-have policy that guides the development and implementation of a coordinated plan to prevent, assess the presence of, intervene in, and respond to incidents of discrimination against, and there's a whole sentence there that means against, classes protected under RSA 354A. Well, right above that, I've given you RSA 354A, which makes it illegal for any person to be excluded from participation in or denied the benefits of or subjected to discrimination in public schools because of their age, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, color, marital status, familial status, disability, religion, or national origin, all as defined in that law. Different school boards responded to the NHSBA recommendation different ways. This board adopted its sample policy, JBAB, virtually unchanged. I saw a note that said with minor modifications, but then I couldn't find what they were, so I apologize for that. I'm trying to recreate things here. That happened here. In Barnstead, the older NHSBA policy had already been adopted. It's shorter, it has less specific language, and I haven't been able to find that the Barnstead board, I wasn't their superintendent at this time either, I haven't been able to find that they revisited it, but they already have that policy. I've given you a copy of it in this packet. At the high school, there was about a 4-month ongoing conversation, and in the end, the high school board, the joint board, amended its policies regarding all kinds of non-discrimination, sexual harassment, and investigations under Title IX related to sexual harassment, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., to make sure they all included explicitly gender identity. So transgender and gender nonconforming students or other members of the school community. So by including that in all of those policies, including Title IX and the others, the high school joint board was complying with this section of RSA 193 at the bottom of the previous page without adopting the NHSBA's model policy. And in the board's last conversation about it, it was kind of left, and we'll see what happens across the state and revisit this in the future. And 2 weeks later, we shut every public school down for the rest of the year due to COVID. And frankly, we never talked about it again, and I would imagine nobody thought about it.
Tim, I
So-
also think that they're in the process of revisiting the model policy, certainly with the work.
I'm getting to that.
Oh, okay.
So it's my last note here is that the NHSBA is no longer recommending the model policy. They pulled it off their website sometime last winter. So the policy that was adopted here is no longer being recommended for adoption by New Hampshire schools by the NHSBA. And then the only thing I had in between, sorry Pam, is that, and we talked about this at your last meeting, some of the challenges that districts have encountered to that policy by people now trying to interpret what it means and finding it not exactly clear, particularly with regard to the role of parents. There is no differentiation in the policy between an elementary school and a high school. It really leaves it to the local board, or where the local board is silent, the school administration has a responsibility to create procedure to make sure that there is no discrimination of any kind in any school. So that's where we are. And I know that that isn't the end of your discussion, but I'm trying to help get you to the point where you're ready to go.
My gut feeling is that based on the work I've seen in another district, that probably the model recommendations aren't going to be ready by November because there is some reaction to legislation that was signed this summer as well. So it's a very nuanced, careful, balanced kind of interpretation, and yes, making sure that parents' rights are strongly informed as well.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out, maybe for people in the public who are here that weren't at our last meeting, that part of what was brought up in the last discussion was a board member wanted to basically eliminate this policy, not to revise it, but to delete it from our books. And one of the arguments used for that was that the NHSBA, that's the New Hampshire School Board Association, had removed it from their recommended policies. It was also mentioned that it was somehow a sample policy that we adopted that was in the minutes, but we get a lot of recommended policies from the School Board Association. They're not necessarily samples. Some of them have been legally vetted. Some of them are legally required. And then we decide as a board and as a community whether it's a policy that makes sense for us. We have other policies that are not necessarily recommended by the New Hampshire School Board Association. I personally am disappointed that the School Board Association removed this policy from their books based on threats of legal action being taken in other districts. I think they did that hastily. I think they should have had some answers of how to replace it, how to revise it before just removing it. It's kind of their job to provide us information. I mean, we pay dues for that. And I think they did that really without providing this board any information as to why they truly did that. The other issue that was brought up at the last meeting was, and also in what you described about the high school discussion, basically was trying to say, well, Title IX provides protection from discrimination. The problem is Title IX, is very broad. And I think we have a lot of policies in a lot of situations where we have broad statements about protections and anti-discrimination, but that's not necessarily telling us how to do that in practice as a school. I think at the end of the day, schools need a clear direction from the board and from associations like the New Hampshire School Board Association that gives us clear direction on what to do with policies and how those look in practice. And by having a clear policy on the books that spells out how we can support students in the school, such as JBAB does for transgender students, we can ensure that all students have the freedom to be themselves, to pursue their dreams, and to have a good life with no exceptions. And I think as a board, it's our job to provide equal educational opportunities for all students, and that means affirming transgender and gender nonconforming students. And the job of the school board is to support students at the school and not to restrict their freedoms based on gender. Our job is to provide a safe environment for education, regardless of gender, regardless of identity, regardless of sex. That how we provide an education is not determined by those things. We provide that to all students equally. But when it comes to a situation where there are roadblocks for certain students to get that education, it's our job as a board to put policies in place to make sure they're protected.
Well, and I think it's important to state that in the policy, if a child wants their name changed and on public record, parents are notified. So there is parent notification within that policy. It's just that if a child is struggling and goes to a guidance counselor and doesn't want to talk to their parents about it, and it's just talking it out, they're not obligated to inform the parents of that chat. So I think that's an important distinction, so that if, I went through this when I was principal, child wanted to have their name changed, but we had to inform the parents before we changed that person's name. It's part of the legalities of it. However, going to the guidance counselor and talking about the feelings that child's having doesn't have to be revealed to parents unless it's of harm to themselves or harm to others. That's the way it works with guidance counselors or social workers. And so therefore, we want to keep that part of the policy so that children don't stop going to trusted adults. I don't think there's one teacher in this building who wouldn't turn that child to a social worker or a guidance counselor. I taught for many years, and if I had a child come to me with something I thought I couldn't handle because I'm not a trained guidance counselor, I was simply an English teacher. Therefore, I would turn that child to the trusted guidance counselor to talk it out in that office with no one else listening. And that's what I wanted to make sure we distinguish tonight. We're not saying parents won't be notified in this policy. It simply says that if the child wants to go to the guidance counselor and talk about their feelings, we don't have to notify the parents of those feelings because that's private. What my fear is, if we tell the kids, say, everything you say to a guidance counselor is going to come forward to your parents, they may not go to that person to talk it out. And then we risk suicide. Because truthfully, that's a lot of kids with transgender issues do commit suicide. It's reality. They need someone to talk to. These are tough feelings they're having. So therefore, we need to provide that protection for them, that they can go to a trusted person and talk to them about it without going to their parents. It's as simple as that. It's like any kind of issue they're having in school. They should be able to go to a trusted adult. It's not just about transgender. It's the way counseling works in a school. And again, if they're a danger to themselves or to others, automatically notification. It's the way it works in schools. So therefore, I have no objection to this policy. You know, Rebecca wants some more time to talk, so I'm giving her that courtesy, and I think that's important. You know, that she has more information she wants to share with us, and that's fine. I think it's important for her to be able to come back in November and talk about that, and she's clear that we have to wait till November.
And I feel like without the full board here, we probably shouldn't even be engaging in debate so much. And just a reminder that the School Boards Association is available to all of our members, so, you know, anybody can call them up and ask for a discussion about the nuances of this policy and the kinds of things they're looking at as they're looking at a new policy. And I'd recommend that all of the members who are comfortable, you know, use that resource that you have.
I also reached out to the ACLU to learn more about different protections and different policies out there, and also what's happening in the state legislature. And one thing that was provided, and this was actually sent to Carol and Tim, but it was hit spam, so you just got copies tonight. From 603 Equality, they shared a letter that was sent by ACLU and GLAD Legal Advocates and Defenders for the LGBTQ community, that was addressed to the Guilford School District, but it obviously talks about general information that I think is useful, both about student information privacy, about use of names and pronouns, and a variety of protections that they feel are important for transgender students in schools. But what Tim passed out didn't have the second page, because there were 4 pages to the email. So if you want to have a copy of the full thing, here's the full letter.
I probably gave half of you the first page and half of you the second page.
Oh, I have 3 and 4.
I had
There's
one.
one and two.
And I got 1 and 2.
Sorry,
Here's
I'm
both.
gonna stack, and I just gave one to every
Yeah.
person
Oh,
at the
you
table.
have 3 and 4?
I get them now.
I have
So that stack's fine, as long as you take 2 sheets.
I just gave Pam.
Yeah, here's the whole
But
thing.
when I handed it out, I didn't look at it.
Sure.
Make sure this ends up on YouTube, please.
Save on paper.
Awesome.
All right, so we're going to table our action on that particular policy. Personnel report. 22-23 new hires. We have new, says
Make a
support
motion
staff.
that we nominate Bailey Gayton, Kyle Sterling, and Sarah Grasso.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, support staff.
Make a motion that we nominate the support staff new hires, Jennifer DeChenko, Cheryl Wood, and Judy Bonvino Fournier. And
Second.
apologies to any of them whose names I butchered.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. So that covered support staff and teachers. There you go. All right, we're on to our second round of public input. Does anyone like to?
Andrea Crusoe again. Can the public get a copy of the scores? You said you had extra copies of those available as well. One of the things that I was thinking about, we've been talking about test scores. How old are you now? No, I'm just kidding. Since the kiddo was little, and and whatnot. And our data, or your data, goes up to this current freshman in the class. You know, as we consider, you know, Barnstable District and Alton District and Prospect District moving on, especially with talk about loss of learning and parents discussed about progression of scores, it may behoove us to start putting NWEA back at the high school, so that we can have consistent data, not just SAT and whatnot, so that we can make those things happen. Also, back in, 2012, 13 or so, I went to the NWEA conference out in Oregon, when they talked about how to use the map data, and like we, Mr. Jazenko's, how do you say it?
Close enough, yeah.
Oh, close enough. It, you know, talked about looking at that NWA data, so they get their strands, so each kid gets a target, you know, so maybe like grade 6, like they don't have number proficiency or whatever the case may be, and so that we can offer some targeted instruction. And then that can continue up through that data for the high school. You know, like we got a freshman team coming in that, you know, can do this, can't do this, and it helps the upper levels prepare for that. You know, and I know that NWEA would be happy to come do stuff.
Oh, I'm
here,
sure they
you know,
would.
I'm sure they would.
Or, you know, I think I was just looking at the thing, it's like next year's conference is in Atlanta. You know, so that's a possibility too. But as a teacher, I would love to have NWEA back in high school. Well, just saying. Thanks.
I think it might be a good time real quick just to point out for the public that the board, we have a new assistant superintendent across all 3 schools, and I'm not sure how much everybody's, you know, that's kind of, you're all focused on getting your kids back into school, and I'm not sure everybody's been paying attention to who's who at the SAU, but so with Matt's arrival, definitely one of the charges is to look at the assessments that are in place in all 3 of these schools and to make recommendations going forward, how to align our kids and how to align our assessments so that we can compare apples to apples going forward.
And he just started,
Yeah.
Yeah.
just to be clear.
2 months.
So-
Doing great.
Sorry, Jason, I thought it was an appropriate time to make that comment.
That's fine.
That time's on us.
Wish again. So I think it's important too that, you know, I'm not up here always with the negatives. I think, Jim, you guys do a great job with my kids. I know we work together well. The teachers have been great. The summer programs, my kid ate it up, you know. But when I was running for school board, I was kind of attacked and saying that we don't need politics in the school. And unfortunately, politics is in our school. There's no way around it. We don't have, you know, we're gonna have all this rights for the trans community, which is fine, all right? Because we're not supposed to discriminate against anybody. And when we create laws and special rules singling out people, I'm sorry, but that's racist, okay? You can't make special rules for black people. You can't make special rules for gay people just because. It's just have a broad thing is not a bad thing because we are a broad people. Having a private bathroom for somebody that identifies as something else, that's fine. But I don't think it's the school board's place to tell children that they have to identify to that person as a boy if they're a girl. I mean, it's absurd to me, you know? We're forcing children to live in this fantasy land, okay? That's not okay. You can't make people do that. It's not a he or a she. You women should be proud of yourselves because us men can't birth children, okay? We just can't do it. That's science. We've spent the last 2 years talking about science. The science of the matter is boys can't have kids. Only you women are built that way, all right? We can't be forcing children to identify to other kids. This is a K-8 building. This isn't even a high school. These kids shouldn't be worried about sex in the 4th grade. They shouldn't be worried about sex in the 5th grade. We should be worrying about getting our test scores from the toilet because of what we did to them during COVID. Okay? These are prime examples of why politics are in the school. It's not in the school. We changed our high school mascot for favor of wokeism. We've continued this mass religion in favor of what? It's ridiculous. And that is why I'm going to continue to run for school board. That is why I'm going to continue to sit here and call out these absurdities. It's ridiculous. We don't force children to live in fantasy lands. Boys are boys, girls are girls. You want to use a separate bathroom? Go for it. Don't discriminate against people. Doesn't matter what they are. They're Americans. We're all equal. Thank you. I love your sign.
Do I have any other public input tonight?
Good evening, Richard Shea. I just want to express my appreciation. I'm very encouraged to hear the undertaking efforts in terms of examining our score situation. I have no doubt that there's always a subject, but perhaps a subject that gets a little more attention now. In industry, we had a general rule that anything you measure gets better, and I think that's going to be true for our efforts in this regard. And I'm very appreciative that they're taking place. Thank you.
Does anyone else like to speak? Would anyone else like to go? All right, in that case, I'll close public input. Future agenda items. It's essentially budget for next,
Right.
so
I
we
was
really
gonna say, I
can't
think
modify
next
that.
week,
We're
next
gonna
week
have that
budget
business
process, yeah.
meeting at the end of the first day. So is there anything you'd like on the agenda for that meeting? We're not gonna discuss that policy at that point because it's too much.
I'd like to add, whether it's to October, well, I would prefer October in brief. I think we need to have some kind of plan in place to address if there is a COVID outbreak, and if numbers go up, I'd like to know what the protocols are in place to react to that, or to be proactive.
Okay. We had a piece of information here about
Yeah, there was
protocols
a
right now.
piece of
if
paper
I
about it.
recall.
Yeah, we sent a,
Yeah.
to
The COVID
staff
protocols.
at the end of last week and to parents today, a description of what the current guidance is from New Hampshire DHHS, which, most of which is to forward us to the CDC. So right now, well, I gave you copies. That's been
Right.
shared with all parents and guardians today.
So COVID is 5 days isolation, 5 days with a mask on.
That's right.
If you're exposed, if you're negative, you still get to go to school. That's what I remember reading today.
That's right. There are no required mitigation protocols for what we were calling close contacts in the past. There is only mitigation for people who are symptomatic or who have a positive test.
Right, so I guess we had discussed at one point other possibilities of random testing or pool testing that might be useful if numbers go up during the fall and during the winter. So that's what I was hoping we'd at least have some
I'll find out.
kind of plan in place to, what's our emergency plan if we've got big numbers to avoid having to go remote or any more drastic mitigation measures to stay ahead of it.
Okay, do you want that added to October?
At least a check-in in
Okay.
October, yeah.
Check in.
Thank you.
I wouldn't mind just a brief report on, if you're doing RTI, what kind of interventions are you doing? Just brief, 5 or 10 minutes, but just something to tell us what
It
path
could even
we're
be in a
on.
report, in a written report.
That's true. You could submit a written report, you wouldn't even have to. Okay. We'll get it beforehand. I love you, Ann. All right.
That way if there's questions, you can bring them up,
Sure,
otherwise.
exactly.
Informational.
Right. That would be helpful, because that is something I would like to see more RTI going on. Did you want something?
When you ask the next question, I do.
When I ask the next question,
Non-public?
do we have a non-public session?
Yes, please, if you would entertain a motion, which I can't make, under 91-A:32 subsection C.
I move that we enter non-public under RSA 91-A:32 subsection C.
Second.
All those, roll call, I guess we have to.